Yeah, very good morning to all of you. Welcome to the 16th lecture of the Dean's 70th Anniversary Lecture Series of the School of International Studies. This initiative has been
Thank you
taken
so much.
by our Dean, Professor Amitav Acharya, to commemorate the completion of 70 years of our school. The antecedents of SIS, as most of you know, can be traced to Sabru House in 1955, when we were known as the Indian School of International Studies. We became part of JNU when it was established in 1969, and we've had this year about 15 lectures from October of 24, ranging from international studies in India, discussions of a Nobel Prize in economics, international law, India's development, its foreign policy, its quest for status in international politics. In fact, there was one on China's foreign policy, and it was delivered by a Japanese professor on human rights, artificial intelligence-based digital technologies, on the world as a family, globalization of power, Trump administration, West Asia, US and regime change in South Asia, as well as on the India-Pakistan interface in summer of 2025, very recent. So these lectures are delivered by our alumni, reputed international analysts, academics, and former professors of our school. Today, we are very pleased and delighted to welcome Professor Amitav Acharya. He is a distinguished professor of international studies at American University, Washington, D.C., where he also holds the UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges and Governance at the School of International Service, and serves as the chair of the ASEAN Studies Initiative. He's had teaching and research stints at NUS, York University, Harvard, and NTU. And of course, he's traveled widely, visited many of the well-known universities. He's became the first non-Western president of the International Studies Association when he was elected to the post for, I think, 2014-15. Three ISA Distinguished Scholar Awards for his contributions. But most of all, he is an alumni of JNU, having done his master's in political science from here. Professor Acharya's major research interests include the diffusion of ideas and norms in world politics, constructivism in IR, comparative regionalism with a focus on ASEAN. He's published widely, has several books, of which is titled, as you can see, The Once and Future World Order, which he will be speaking on today. Before we really begin, I request Professor Amitav to really felicitate Professor Amitav Acharya. It's a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you so much. And there is a mug of 70 years.
Thank you.
And could I also ask Sally Acharya and Arun Acharya, we'll give them small tokens of remembrance.
You come here?
Please come here.
That's my wife and my son. Okay.
Yeah. Please come and collect small tokens of your remembrance of your visit. Mrs. Acharya, please give her a round of applause. And Arun Acharya. Thank you, Professor Preeti Singh, who is the convener of the 70th year lecture series. And it is my great honor and privilege also to welcome back to the School of International Studies to one of our most illustrious alumni, Professor Amitav Acharya. As you've heard, he stands amongst the foremost global thinkers in the field of IR, a scholar whose work has redefined, some may say, the discipline and expanded the horizons far beyond its traditional Western anchors. This is the book which has also been reviewed by the New York Times and reviewed extremely favorably by the New York Times, but the endorsements are equally impressive. And there is a publisher has made available copies which are, in these days of academics, it's remarkably affordable at 700 rupees or 699. So almost everyone, I think, can afford this. Uh, Professor Acharya is Distinguished Professor of IR at American University, Washington. He's been a friend of long years. He's a pioneer of what we now call global IR, a powerful intellectual movement that challenges Eurocentric theories, foregrounds voices from the global south, and reimagines world order for a truly pluralistic century. It's serendipitous that we are discussing Prashant Sahu's course on global IR at this moment when we have Professor Acharya present here. His groundbreaking contributions to norm diffusion, regional security orders in Asia, and the evolution of global governance have made him one of the most cited and respected scholars of our time. From these very classrooms or the classrooms in down campus of SIS, where he began his academic journey, Professor has gone on to author and edit more than 24 books, including several that have become essential reading in IR scholarship worldwide. Professor Preeti Singh pointed out that he is the first non-Western scholar to have been president of the ISA, and he had a tremendous tenure as the president. So Professor Acharya is not merely a chronicler of international change, he is one of its leading interpreters and architects of thought. Through his scholarship, he has given intellectual legitimacy to and societies often of IR theory. For us at SIS, there's particular pride in knowing that one of our own has not only excelled but transformed the discipline on the world stage. In welcoming him today, I, as Dean, not just greet a distinguished alumnus, we all celebrate a pathbreaker, a thought leader, and an enduring inspiration for generations of students who aspire to think beyond boundaries. May I now invite Professor Acharya to deliver his talk based on his book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam, and thank you very much, Amitav, for inviting me, even though it's kind of a last-minute thing, but very kind of you. And I'm really pleased to be back in the campus where I spent 3 great years of my student life, 2 in Center for Political Studies, but 1 year also in SIS. It wasn't here at that time. I did not complete my MPhil. I left 6 months before I was supposed to submit because we had a big strike in 1983. And the university closed down. But those memories and those experiences have always stayed with me. In fact, I don't know, I've mentioned this before in my writing, but the global IR concept was first time mentioned in 2013 at the Indian Conference on International Studies that JNU organized, and I was a keynote speaker. But thank you very much. Since the time is short, I will be quick, and after 20 minutes or so presentation, I'll take a few questions. As Professor Martis said, the book is available. It's cheaper than 2 cups of cappuccino in Starbucks. So you all should be even. We are not a very rich university, but we should be able to afford that. And I think you'll get more out of it from the book than what I can say today. So this is the book. One is a British edition, one is the American edition. The one you have here is the paperback, which is why it's cheaper, and it's available right in Delhi, in their office in Gurgaon of Hachette Books. Okay, so this is my 5 major points summarizing the book, and in some ways it comes from beginning to the end. And starting with the key argument, really the key argument of the book is that world order is not a monopoly, but a shared creation. And what I mean by shared creation is that the big institutions of world order, I'm not talking about world order of the past, it can change, but even today's world order, contemporary world order, which we often credit to the West, is actually the main institutions and ideas and practices were forced across millennia, across the world, across all the regions of the world, over 5 millennia. Those would include empire, independence of states, diplomacy, peace treaties, free trade, humanitarian values, and much more. These are not exclusively created by the West. In many cases, they were predated in early forms, foundational forms, maybe crude forms, but they were founded in many parts of the world, including Greece and Rome, but well beyond Greece and Rome. They were also created in not only China, India, Islam, but also Africa and the pre-Columbian Americas. So that's what I mean by shared creation. Some of them spread through diffusion, so one region learning from another, the West learning from the rest, and rest learning from the West. Although those terms are very artificial and very new, but I think let's say, the contemporary West got many ideas from the rest, and also the global South today also got many ideas from the West. But it was a mutual construction. And in some ways, they were also independently created, not through diffusion. Not everything in the world is through diffusion. So civilizations also independently innovate very similar ideas, including scientific ideas. For example, we know that the idea of zero was invented in India, but there was something very similar in ancient Peru, which is a very contemporary old civilization. And there was no evidence of communication between India and Peru 2,000 years ago. And there are many other institutions that are created independently because human beings, being human beings, tend to develop similar solutions to similar problems they face. Problems of anarchy, problems of hierarchy, problems of war. So they tend to come up with similar ideas, some differences, but also similarities. What I found during this history of 5,000 years is that there are actually more similarities than we recognize. We tend to accentuate differences among cultures and civilizations. That's why the extreme form of that is class of civilizations. But I actually thought we have ignored a lot of similarities. And I'm not saying everything is same, but they are to a large extent very similar. And then the foundations of these ideas, even though they have Greek and Latin or English or French names, but they also were developed, the same institutions and same ideas developed across continents over millennia. The rise of the West, which we can date from 16th century onwards, but you can also date it from happened without borrowing some of these ideas from the rest of the world, non-Western civilizations. And I have a lot of evidence of which specific ideas from the rest, or say Islam, China, India, contributed to the rise of the West, but also resources, not just ideas, but resources, including human resources. So slave trade, for example, the classic example, but gold and silver and agricultural products from Latin America, the South America and North America, the indigenous civilizations. They also, without them, the West would not have reached. And here, a lot of books that are there who already talk about how the West appropriated resources from the rest of the world, the slavery from Africa, from slavery. But my main contribution here, the value added, is that I look at philosophical and world order ideas, not the science and technology of zero and compass and gunpowder or Islamic navigation. But I also look at Islamic philosophy, how it contributed to Western rationalism, Indian philosophy, Chinese civil service systems, so institutions that are political, not just technical and scientific. They also contributed to the rise of the West. Non-Western societies, moving on, this is a kind of the later part of my book. Most of the book is historical, about I would say 2/3 of the book is historical. But the last, say, 2 chapters, plus the conclusion, talks about the last 100 years or so. And in that period, I look at how this non-Western societies, and broadly stated, non-Western here doesn't mean, the term West and non-West are very problematic, but the terms of convenience. Non-Western societies were not what we call today Global South, used to be called Third World when I was a student here. They were not passive beneficiary of Western innovations of world order. They were active contributors. And in some ways, this started with the anti-colonial movements in the 19th century, but it really took off in the 20th century, and certainly took off even more in the after World War II. So the so-called liberal world order that we think United States created and the West are kind of managed, that is unraveling before us today, actually was not a purely the handiwork of Western countries. And that includes the United Nations, norms of human rights, collective security, and justice and equality, and humanitarian intervention. Many of the norms of the post-45 period, including, by the way, facilitating trade, investment, and development assistance. They are substantial participation from the global south. Just wanted to tell you one point of statistics. 30 countries out of 50 that participated in the drafting of the UN Charter are from the global. Majority from Latin America, but they are represented to the global south. And but they were also non-independent India represented at the San Francisco conference, and some African countries, Middle Eastern countries, the Republic of China. So despite the fact that the UN is often seen as an American creation, and to some extent was, and the committee chairs of the key committees, the chairs of those committees were mainly Western, with one exception, an Indian, Ramaswamy Mudalia, chaired the Economic and Social Committee. But even though they did not chair the committee, they played a major role in the debates and discussions and the creation of norms, the redefinition of norms, including challenging the Western creation of norms at that conference. So subsequently, with the rise of, with the independence of global South countries, or a post-colonial, what we call states, they came to play a very important role in multilateralism. So global South was never a passive recipient. And also, one of the things that I probably is counterintuitive to a lot of the discourse on global South, they were never really truly what we call, what Hedley Bull once called revolt against the West. They were revolting, but they were also building. Muhammad Ayub, who actually taught in this school, and Charles Hedley Bull, who also taught in this school in the Indian School of International Studies, for JNU was established. They disagree on this. Hedley Bull called it revolt against the West. That tells you that it's kind of a disruptive, challenging force. To some extent, it was the post-colonial, anti-colonial movements. But Muhammad Ayub actually redefines it as kind of also a contributor. And I have taken that contribution part in great detail to see that Global South was actually a bridge rather than a kind of a disruptor of global order, in a very, very positive sense. So the fourth point, the decline of Western dominance. This is the very, it's kind of a very central issue today. As you know, everybody's talking about the fall of world order and the like. My point is that the decline of the West need not be a bad thing. It's actually, in many ways, a good thing. It helps us to overcome the West versus the rest divide, which I think should go. But also, it doesn't mean the end of world order. So what a lot of the Western discourse talks about is that end of the US-led world order is the end of world order. So the whole world is conflates a particular type of order which has been with us since 1945 as the end of world order, as if world order began and ended since with the creation of it by the United States, the liberal order in 1945. So my argument that world order predates 1945 because many of the ideas and institutions have been with us. They're not inventions of the West. They were created in multiple places, which is why they will survive. And I'm not saying that these modern contemporary forms will survive per se, but the general foundations and norms of world order will survive and could become even more inclusive in the longer term, despite short-term disruptions and crises. So there'll be more of a level playing field and more inclusive world order. Finally, looking a little forward, and also what's happening today, the future is, I consider, multiplex, not multipolar, not unipolar nor bipolar. I don't think China is going to replace the United States. I don't think China and US will have a duopoly in dominating world order the way the US and the Soviet Union did in the Cold War, or multipolar, a handful of great powers, whether that includes India or not. But let's say the United States, China, India, some of the European countries, France and Britain of the European Union, Russia, I don't think they can, as a bloc, also create world order or manage world order because they don't agree among themselves. In fact, you talk about global south being divided, right? But there is actually more unity in the global south than among the five powers, or the six great powers. They are the disruptive force. Actually agrees on many points. This is why the global south together, majority of them condemned the Soviet invasion of Ukraine, not because they don't like, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, not because they don't like Russians, but as a matter of principle. And they also, vast majority of them condemned the Israeli genocide in Gaza, whereas the United States kept vetoing the resolution for ceasefire. So the global south is actually an upholder of norms, and there is more consensus in the global south about international norms than among the great powers. So that's why the multipolar concept, which is a club of great powers basically, to me is not adequate. The distribution of power may be multipolar, but polarity is about distribution of military and economic power. But world order is more than that. It's about ideas, it is about norms, it's about leadership, it's about interactions. So if you bring all that together, multipolarity is a very old-fashioned 19th century term. What happened in Europe, and we associate that with instability and conflict. But in reality, multipolarity is only a small part of world order. The multiplexity, which is an overarching layer above and beyond multipolarity, where we talk about non-state actors, middle powers, we talk about regional powers, international institutions, and of course, norms and ideas and leadership. If you bring that all together, that's what the world is going to be, not just a multipolar world. All right, this is pretty much the 5 major points. And I will give you a couple of examples very quickly. Again, they're all in the book, and you can read it. But for the lack of time, I don't have time to explain them to you. So these are kind of the 10 ideas I've selected from my book. There are many, but the 10 ideas that actually I think make my point that world order is a shared creation. The independent state system is one. Sumer, Greece, Maya, India, before Westphalia. The idea of Westphalia, you can talk about as a distinctive creation of the Europeans, but it's actually basic idea is that states should be independent. Okay, they should not be absorbed by empire, and that idea goes back to the Sumerian city-states. The diplomacy and peace treaties originated in the Near East. Article in Foreign Policy magazine that talks about how the Amarna system mid second millennium BC, around 1500 BC, 5 great powers maintained order for 200 years. So Egypt, Hatti, Mitanni, Assyria, and Babylon for 200 years, the great powers. Very similar to what the European concert did centuries and millennia later, but were far more successful. The first diplomatic peace treaty also was between Egyptians and Hittites, laid out the principles of non-intervention and extradition. Then I talk about Persia's creation of the first universal empire, which tolerated all ethnic nationalities and religions. Ancient India's just war principle. This is one which is actually ahead of what we have today in the Geneva Convention. This is not imperfect. This is more perfect than what we have today. And then we have Chinese public service, which was emulated by open public service. Now, many of you are thinking about IAS. The idea that you don't have to be born in a royal family or a feudal family or landlord to actually join the highest ranks of Indian civil service. That's really a Chinese invention because the Chinese basically Confucian public examination system, they call it public examination rather than civil service examination, was borrowed by the British and then by the Americans. And I trace the process of meritocratic selection to the civil service rather than based on heredity or wealth. Then talk about Islamic philosophy, very important, how Islam in that period between the 9th century AD to about 12th, 13th century AD was really the core area in the world of philosophy, meaning questioning established wisdom, creating debate, and also in some ways reviving Greek philosophy and trying to give it, bring it up to date and adding a lot of new dimensions. So it's not just about medicine or algebra, which are very astronomy, Islamic science and technology contributed a lot new ideas there. But it's also philosophy that Islam played a very important role. And that philosophy, especially how the world was created, and it's basically basis of one of the foundational ideas about world order. Africa, property rights, how to also humanely treat slaves. Africa had slavery like everybody else had, but some of the early principles of treating slaves humanly and also property rights came from there as well. Mongol and Indian Ocean connectivity, not only with the foundations of globalization, but they also were used, the same trade routes that the Indian Ocean merchants developed were actually used by the Portuguese to find their way to India, and later on by other imperial powers from the West. That was the foundation of globalization, and that globalization was managed by small states of Indian Ocean, port city states, not by big empires. And pre-Columbian civilizations have a lot to contribute, including ideas of empire, but also confederacy, peaceful coexistence, that the Chinese might put it, but it's the idea that a group of states can actually live peacefully for more than 500 years and have rules and norms of conflict management. The Iroquois Confederacy in North America showed the way, including to America's founders like Benjamin Franklin, who learned from there. And post-colonial nations advanced discrimination, racial equality, and multilateralism, something I mentioned. Even though credit to the Western countries for that, but actually the idea of self-determination is not the term. So you have to dissociate a particular term from the particular idea, because we have a linguistic hegemony in international relations, because many of the terms we use today, like hegemonia from Greek, or sovereignty from super, they are from either Greek or Latin, right? And they came to us through medieval French, medieval French and vulgar English, and became modern English. But ideas, that doesn't mean Greeks actually invented these ideas. Idea of sovereignty, idea of interdependence, idea of just war. So we don't conflate the naming of a particular idea with actually the substance of that idea. And that's what my book actually delves in. And in that sense, self-determination may seem like an English term and it came from Europeans, but the idea of self-determination was there well before the term actually became popular in Europe. And the credit belongs to anti-colonial movements who wanted to become independent. Self-determination. Racial equality was completely ignored in the UN because of the insistence of Americans, and of course, at that time, the United States basically rejected the racial equality norm at the Versailles Conference after World War I. It was not mentioned in any of the discussions in UN Charter, but it was revived at the Bandung Conference and presented as an international norm, and then the UN adopted a resolution enshrining racial equality as a global norm. And there is so many things that happen, so that's a contribution. So I've selected this 10 to give you an idea of how world order is a shared creation. And then moving on, I will give you a few examples, not many, but of how this happened. So I talked about the first peace treaty, Egyptian-Hittite treaty in 12. So there's one of the principles is non-aggression. This is written in, is available. There are two versions of it. One is in Egypt, and the Ramses is a temple, and other one is in archaeological museum in Istanbul, in Akkadian language or Pharaonic language. Basically says that non-aggression. The great prince of Hatti shall not trespass against the land of Egypt forever, and the ruler of Egypt shall not trespass against the land of Hatti. The interesting thing is that these two superpowers, that period, Egypt and Hatti, they fought wars, and they fought a major war in 1275. It was a draw. Unlike contemporary states, nobody considered defeat. So the Egyptians said, we won, and the Hatti said, we won. A little bit like India, Pakistan, who got most out of it. But they did sign a treaty. And that treaty basically outlined several principles, and one of them is this. And it's, again, written in stone, available to anybody. There is also non-interference, that basically extradition, that if a person from let's say Egypt flees, like a terrorist from Egypt flees to Haiti and takes shelter, the ruler of Haiti will return that person back to Egypt rather than give shelter. No sheltering of dissidents or rebels, vice versa in between the two states. There is also an alliance. If Haiti is attacked, say, by Assyria, then Egypt will send forces to defend Haiti. And it is written down, just like US Japan mutual alliance treaty. So many of the modern principles are enshrined in this treaty. And again, that goes on to show that these things happened well before the European state system or the Greek state system evolved. And another example is I mentioned about the Indian Ocean. We give credit to Hugo Grotius for inventing the principle of freedom of seas, but actually Indian Ocean had traditions of freedom of seas in practice for centuries before that, centuries before Grotius. Hugo Grotius was actually working for the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, defending the Dutch looting and seizure of a Portuguese ship of Singapore because they thought Portuguese were harassing Dutch shipping. And Grotius wrote this book, Mare Liberum, chapter of a book, which people say this is where freedom of the seas happened or came about. But in reality, this was in practice in Indian Ocean for centuries. I think one of our former professors in JNU, Anand, I think, Professor Anand.
Anand.
Yeah, he wrote about this. But now I have done more research to develop that. So you can see when the Dutch actually defeated the Portuguese, they went and established, with the support of legalists like Hugo Grotius, legitimizing that Dutch attack on the Portuguese. And Dutch captured Malacca, went to Indonesia. They established even a bigger monopoly. So Grotius's argument that nobody should have a monopoly over the sea. The sea belongs to all. So the Portuguese had no right to deprive the Dutch from trading in the Indies. And that's what Mare Liberum was about. Then the Dutch went on to establish even a bigger monopoly of their own. And when they started harassing the Muslim sultans of the Spice Islands, the Sultan of Makassar, Goa said to Dutch that God made the land and the sea. The land he divided among men, and the sea gave in common. It has never been heard that anyone should be forbidden to sell the seas. That's freedom of the seas. Because in Asia, in the Indian Ocean, there was no tradition of empires extending their jurisdiction to the sea. The jurisdiction of empires stopped on land. Even the Mughal emperor, very powerful, never really interfered in the trading in the seas. So the management of trade was left to these little city-states from Malindi, Malacca, Mogadishu, Aden, Hormuz, Mombasa in Africa, and Arabian Peninsula, Calicut, and then going up to Malacca. No empire interfered there. And Malacca in the 15th century, there was laws, rules-based system about who pays what customs duty, what are the system of arbitration if there is a dispute, and how to manage price fixing. All this was done not by the Sultan, but by a committee of trained traders, including Gujaratis and Kalinga people, but also Chinese, Japanese, and Arabs. So this is a very well-established system of trade that lasted for centuries. It was not managed by empires and big powers. That goes on to also say that you don't need a hegemonic power to provide openness. The openness can be actually this trade, economic openness, maritime openness can be managed by small states. Don't need Britain or the United States or China or India for that matter as a big power. Right. So this is another example. And finally, humanitarian values. You can see, I know Manu is not dear to everybody. He said a lot of things about the role of women that people reject and think is backward. But when it comes to these principles, he codified. This is a code. But you will find similar principles in Kautilya and Shastra. You will find similar principles in Mahabharata, the Joshua tradition, the most developed Joshua tradition. So you can see similar to Geneva Conventions, was codified. So not striking, surrendered, were afflicted with disease or sorrow, who laid down their weapons, and also who have fled the battlefield, also not harming civilians, not using poisonous weapons as well. There is a separate section of Code of Manu. And the Geneva Conventions kind of replicates that in many ways. But these were developed and these were used. Now, let me just say one important thing here, that this is not done because Indians are peaceful people. No. India is as brutal and violent as any other civilization. But the Indian civilization had this knack for devising rules and norms to make wars limited. And the Code of Manu, these principles are to reduce the violence of war and make it actually not totally destructive. So not because the civilization is very peaceful. It has peaceful elements, but it also has militant elements. So no civilization is like purely virtuous or purely evil. So these principles are management mechanisms to limit the scope of violence and reduce the destructiveness of war and make the war more just and humane. Now, that's what it is about. Okay, so I'll give you 3 examples. Don't have time, I can talk about property rights. Maybe this is one thing I will end with. You have the Magna Carta talks about property rights, which was done through coercion of King John by the nobility in early 1215. Around the same time, the Mandan Charter in Mali also principles of how to transfer property, what are the ideas about holding property and how you can legally or justly or cleanly transfer property. So a lot of similarities. There must be payment for property taken in Magna Carta, compensation for property damage, right to inheritance, very important, was enshrined, which in Britain at that time was not absolute. At those days, England. In Mali, the founder of Mali Empire, Sundiata Keita, proclaimed this more orally, but the tradition has survived, that there are 5 ways to acquire property: buying, donation, exchange, work, and inheritance. And anything else you do is not right. Also talks about everybody has a right to life. That's also fundamental to human rights. Right to property and right to life are the 2 most fundamental human rights that we have today. Now, these are not Western inventions per se. The Magna Carta was nullified by the Pope 10 years later as null and void because it was done through coercion of the king, and the Pope was protecting the king. And it was meant to benefit only the property class. In fact, the peasants suffered more because the serf and the nobility now can say, we have property rights. We have been sanctioned by the king. So the peasants had no property rights. Sundiata Keita's Mandan Charter applied to all, not just to the nobility, for everybody, and was never nullified. Okay, so despite variations, these are the foundations of world order. So I am to now move on. I want to show you some of the books that the Islamic philosophers translated, were translated first from Greek and Sanskrit to Arabic, and Arabic back to Latin and French. So it's kind of a circulation of knowledge, and the vast majority of some of the key philosophical and scientific writings, including medicine, actually coming from Greece, were preserved in this way. Some of them are only preserved in the Greek Arabic translation, like Aristotle's Metaphysics, very important book. In the first modern Europe's first exposure to Aristotle's Metaphysics was in Arabic, not in Greece, because the Greek text had disappeared at that time. We found some of them or later. Similarly, the ideas of the Indian ideas of mathematics were translated Surya Siddhanta, for example, by Khwarizmi, who actually led the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, and it was kind of the lead, like the dean of the House of Wisdom. So you can see that we have a circulation of knowledge. The Greeks borrowed a lot of ideas from Egypt, Sumer, and they developed their own ideas and contributed their own ideas. And then the Arabs, a lot of Muslims, Persians were very much involved there too. They developed this into more sophisticated forms. They added a lot of new ideas, and Europe borrowed these ideas to translation and retranslation. In some ways, we have parallels to that with Buddhist texts. They were written in India, but they disappeared after Buddhism declined in India. The Chinese have kept them, and the Indians now borrow the Chinese text to see what are some of the sutras were like. So this is the important contribution of Islam, apart from many other things I'm not have time to talk about. Okay, so I think looking at the time, I will like conclude by one thing why I wrote this book. I wrote this book because I was teaching a course in 2014, started teaching in 2013. And I wanted a textbook, and Henry Kissinger's book just came out in 2014. And I looked at it, and this is typical of what I'm talking about. So the first chapter starts with Europe, second chapter starts with Europe, and then Islam is a world in disorder in the middle, and of course Iran is, as you can imagine, India gets one section, China gets a section, and Asia as a whole a chapter. Then we end up with the United States. So we begin with Europe, end with the United States, and that's what world order is about. As if Europe invented world order and America perfected and protected it. So I wrote this book partly because I wanted my students, who are mainly white Anglo-Saxon students in the East Coast of the United States, they had no idea about this. And I thought, you should really I cannot let you just read Kissinger. So I gave them this, and this book came out of a lot of my lectures. So start with the Sumerians and Egyptians and Assyrians, and contrasting Greece gets a lot of credit for innovation. Persia gets very little credit, was vilified as the villain. I reversed that because that's really the truth. Then India, China, Rome, Islam, and Mongol and Indian Ocean, rise of the West, lost world, and Americas before Columbus, Africa, went back to Europe, and United States, and return. I call it return of the rest, not rise of the rest, because what we see, the rise of the global south, is actually return of the global south. And then I talk about the future being a multiplex world, not a singular hegemony of a one power or two, or multipolar hegemony of 5 or 6, but a multiplex, which multi-civilizational, decentered, and that's something I have written already before this book, but I brought this into the book. And I think I'll just stop here because there's a lot more I can talk about, but you should definitely take a look at the book and articles. I think I'm happy to send you this article in New York Times. We did a good job of summarizing why. I mean, they allowed me to actually publish an article on the day the book was published, which is unheard of. This is like endorsing the book, which New York Times doesn't do very much. And New York Times is not everybody's cup of tea. I mean, Wall Street Journal doesn't like me. And you can imagine, because they think this is all anti-Western, too anti-Western for them, which it's not. But I think it is good to say that we can still have ideas like this in the world after American hegemony. And it endorses the concept of global multiplex. So the idea of not the review by New York Times, but letting me publish an op-ed on 8th of April, the day the book came out, was, I think, to me, a significant big thing in the sense of how these Western magazines are sometimes very skeptical of this. Okay, so I will take a few questions, 10 minutes, and then we have a very tight schedule.
Okay, thank you so much, Amitav, for that splendid overview of the book. So we have 10 minutes for questions. I just wanted to make 2 points. First of all, I think it's important to interrogate the 3 main ideas of Professor Acharya's book, which is that notions of order, the whole idea of stability in the international system was never a monopoly of the West. In the past, and as recently as the framing of the Charter of the United Nations, several civilizations, countries, ideas have played a role in shaping what we have called the order today. Secondly, that in the future also, there'll be multiple actors responsible for shaping that world order. And that finally, the third point which he makes is that the decline of the West is not necessarily such a bad thing, which intuitively most of us respond to. But often we think that maybe it might descend into some form of nativism, which might not be a preferred alternative. And he often described the whole idea of a multiplex, where you'll have different from multipolarity. One is that the number of actors will be greater. economics and military will no longer be the principal instruments. Ideas will matter, and no one power will have a domination of all the instruments of shaping this order. If I can quickly summarize your arguments, I wanted to make one point. You may have entered this room with a song playing. That was a song from a film called Nikah, in which Salma Agha plays the title role, and she. This was a song which is etched in the memory of Professor Acharya as the song on the day that he left JNU to pursue higher studies in the West. This was the song playing in the mess or in the taxi.
Kamal Complex. Somebody was playing
yeah, Kamal Complex.
At the middle of the night.
Middle of the night, Dil Ke Arma.
And my flight was at 2 a.m. in the morning.
So I think that memory tells you how much JNU is imprinted on his memory, how much Kamal Complex is imprinted on his memory, and how much that song still resonates with him as a form of nostalgia. I open it up for a quick 2 or 3 questions. Faculty, and then I'll alternate. Professor Salma Baba. And will you take them all together?
Yeah, I think that's better.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Acharya, and I take the liberty of calling you Amitav because you've known me so long. It was exactly 10 years back when you held the ISA presidentship. I was there when you delivered that presidential keynote. The world has changed definitely. I think 3 things stand out in what you said. One was the world of ideas. Second, the point for us as scholars is how does codification take place? Codification. Ideas codification. And third is the diffusion. The marketplace of ideas. I want to draw your attention to what you said in the sense of why does an idea dominate at a point in time and why do others fail? Is that a function of the power distribution defined in the system just now that allows what we call the post-45 construct to exist? And you spoke in the end about the return of the rest, because that exactly is what it is. But it's fascinating to look in this multiplex. The beltways of power transmission are very asymmetrical. So how do you see that the power of an idea isn't coming from another place, reclaim? I think the point is to reclaim the idea.
Okay.
So how does that reclaim happen when we look at the beltway of power, which can create virtuosity?
The student in the identify yourself.
Sir, I have 2 questions.
Just
first, one question and
time is short.
And your name.
My name is Prof. I am doing PhD in Veteran Center Studies. My first question is that, sir, what do you think about illiberal world order which West talks about when it comes to Russia and China, when they are promoting norms which they feel that these norms are illiberal? This is the first question. And one more thing.
No, sir, we don't have the time.
Yeah, so that's
Please.
fine. I got the idea. Illiberal.
Anyone from the faculty? Yeah, Manish and then Rashmi.
Brilliant lecture, sir. You talked about multiplex world order. I think it's very fascinating. We are re-looking at the order itself. But as of now, we are struggling with the problems of multipolar world order. So how multiplexity or multiplex world orders do add, or what makes you inviting this world of optimism? What makes you think that?
Okay. Very good.
Any student? Where? Yeah, please.
Hello, my name is Vanchita. In the definition of the multiplex order, it stated transnational actors as well. And when we discuss world order and order making, we see it as a real state of enterprise. So I was just wondering, in the multiplex order that you talk about as more constructed by non-state actors.
Okay.
One more and then.
Yeah, we're just concluding it then.
Thank you, Professor Acharya. I'm Dr. Rashmi Barwa. I teach economics here at SIS. So my question is a little bit towards the economic side of it, because sort of thinking about this from the point of view of like Asimov, Johnson, Robinson, kind of what is the origin of this? I'm thinking about your idea. There is, the the global south was more empathetic or, had these norms which were, and so I'm just thinking, what is the origin of that? Is it because you think the more class division you have, more ethnic fractionalization you have, and those other societies which eventually had, more norms which would get towards empathy?
Okay.
Okay, one final. Rajan, you wanted to?
Yeah.
One final.
Thank you, sir. I'm Rajan. I teach in History of International Studies, and I was there at Aligarh Muslim University where you were giving the lectures. So my lecture preceded your lectures. So I would just want to know, I've read your book, the previous book, The Making of the Global High, and most of the points are from there, and also your figures are from this complex that you've been saying for the last number of years. So how do you kind of reconcile the mythological contradiction where you turn towards post-colonialism and your heretics, and you also accept that number, but at the same time you're also proposing grand theories, and then examples that are coming in the book, they're mostly from the context, which is much more post-colonial. So I want to know how you reconcile the mythological contradiction.
Okay.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I am kind of in this particular session talking more of history, so I'll bring in some historical examples. The global IR stuff is a little different, but there is a relationship between global IR and global history. You cannot do global IR without global history, or you can do any IR without global history. So this book kind of gives you ammunition to expand and broaden IR, but bringing in more historical examples of order building from which you can develop theories, something that post-colonialism doesn't do. Post-colonialism doesn't go to pre-colonial periods very much. So the main question, I think there's a big question about multipolarity, how this differs from multiplexity, and how do we reclaim ideas in that kind of a setting. I think, let me just tell you something on multipolarity. It's a very attractive term. The minister's office, by the way, pinging me all the time, the card number and all these things. I'm meeting our external affairs minister after this, bit in a hurry. Everybody loves multipolarity, right? Because it gives them a seat at the table. The Russians like it, the Indians like it, the French used to love it during the Cold War. But this because they feel empowered by having 5 powers, and they're one of them, and instead of 1 or 2. But multipolarity also doesn't give space to if India is not a great power but a middle power, so India has no place, or Australia has no place. Where Amitav spent a lot of time. We know that Australia is a very consequential actor, and Canada has spent a lot of time. So the number of actors, the non-state actors, don't get space in multipolarity. So, but I think they do matter, and so multipolarity basically compresses or marginalizes the role of other actors. That's why I was not happy with multipolarity. I think polarity is important, but it's only one part of the show. That's the world order. But also we have this kind of negative connotation with multipolarity, as if it would mean breakdown of the order. Because we have Russia and China and all these things are illiberal countries, right? But that's based on a very narrow reading of their historical contribution. And the world order has never been perfectly liberal, and that also means by what is liberalism. Liberalism, the way we define it, is often seen as coming out of the West, but should apply to everybody else. So liberals have this idea that liberalism is a Western idea from Kant and Hegel or John Locke, but it should apply to everybody. It's good for everybody. That's a hugely ethnocentric, almost racist claim, because Kant and Hegel and of course, John Locke to some extent were also racist. They thought of the non-Western societies as inferior, and Kant much more specifically so. So they think everybody else who was not this classical Enlightenment liberalism is illiberal and kind of bad. But the broad ideas of liberalism, including free trade, including humanitarian values, these are also liberal ideas. But liberals will never admit that they were created elsewhere. So my quarrel with liberals has always been, you have some great ideas, but don't say that you invented this, Europeans, and we have to all accept it. If you say, on the other hand, it was actually a shared tradition of liberalism everywhere, just like the tradition of realism. We have Machiavelli, and realists do a much better job in admitting that than liberals. If you actually accept the global origins of liberal principles, then it's much more acceptable. So this idea of illiberal, liberal, to me doesn't cut ice. It's very ideological, very political, And also that's why, in terms of multipolarity, the problem with another problem here is that when we talk about multipolarity is unstable, we find examples where multipolarity was stable. I mean, I give the example going back to 15th century BC, when five great powers of multipolar sort of what we call Near East here, West Asia, Egypt and its neighbors, maintained order for 200 years, in fact, maybe more. No major war among great powers. The European consular powers after Napoleon lasted about 50 years, collapsed with the Crimean War, leading to 2 world wars. So actually, management of multipolarity, the West can learn something from the rest. And this is the theme of a foreign policy magazine article just published last week. So that's what I'm talking about in this book. And finally, I'm not talking about grand theories. I mean, global IR is not a grand theory. It's not even a theory. What I want to do, people can build theories out of this, opening up the field to challenge Western centrism. I don't reject realism, liberalism, constructivism. True global IR scholars don't reject that, unlike postmodern and post-colonial scholars. We think all is welcome as long as you are broad and you are not narrow. As long as they recognize that these ideas have multiple bases. Okay, the minister's office is calling. So
Yeah, we'll just.
I am supposed to tell them.
Yeah.
Can somebody give the card number? Can you?
So I've sent you.
You already sent the card number. Okay. So I will call back in 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I'm just finishing. I'll be on time. Don't worry. At 12:30.
Yeah, it's 11 o'clock.
Because I think they get berserk, the staff. So I think the idea of this book, as a final point, this book is not going to give you theories per se, but it will allow you to develop theories and redefine and theories with more examples, more history, and sometimes totally alternative ways of building IR. So the global IR book that you read, that's basically about theory and but our concept. This is about history that can lead to theory. So they kind of, now we have global IR redefining, broadening IR theory. You have this multiplex world redefining and broadening world order understanding. So they're kind of symbiotic. I think we should.
Yeah, well, you don't worry about time because we're fixed.
These people
You just send them the thing.
Honorable Minister.
And Professor Sandeep Singh, you will give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Acharya. Our heartfelt thanks to you for coming to the campus within a very short notice and giving us the popularity of yours as academic and scholars from India and Kenya. So thank you so much, and thank you team 70th year teacher series of the SIS for organizing this very valuable group discussion on